Okay.
That's good, Larry. So I will officially call the meeting to order, and I'll start with announcements. I guess the first announcement is kind of a sad one. Earlier in the week, we had the funeral for, or I should say last week, we had the funeral for the retired Irvington Police Detective Dave Walsh. The outpouring of emotion and support from pretty much every department in the village, obviously the police department, but the fire department, the rec department, DPW, Larry and Brenda's teams, and just residents. It was just a great outpouring of support and love for the Walsh family and for Dave. It was very well deserved, and I think the family was touched. I know I was touched, and it's a saddened event. It was the respect and words, kind words towards Dave, I think were really a comfort to the family, as much as you can have in something like this. Obviously our prayers go out to his wife and his family, and he's definitely going to be missed. It is a big hole in Irvington because he was just such a great person, police officer or not. He was just one of the nicest people I ever met. We've talked about this before, but I kind of a moment of silence on a Zoom call doesn't really seem appropriate. So I'll just ask everyone to keep his family and him in your prayers and thoughts. That's all. But back to the more mundane, they'll announce a public hearing to consider a local law amending Chapter 115 peddling and 114 fees of the Irvington Code for Monday, August 15th at 7 p.m. in Village Hall. Marianne, did you want to give a quick overview of these, or?
Yeah, it's really not a substantive change in the law. It's just changing the term from peddler to mobile vendor. That's it, pretty much. A couple of changes here and there, but no substantive changes, just a change in the wording.
Very good. Yeah, I think Larry Lonke wanted to update the term peddler. So Marianne did some research and
we're ahead of the county on this one.
I like that.
Every other municipality still calls them vendors, but
we'll let them change. We'll let them change our wording in 110 years.
Right.
So I will make a motion to have a public hearing to consider a local law amending chapters 155 peddling and 114 fees of the Irvington Code for Monday, August 15th, 2022. If I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, Marianne.
Next we had checks over $25,000. We had to Pacific Trans Global Construction as part of the clock tower from the Capital Clock Tower repair from the Capital Fund of $80,711. I believe that's a scaffolding fee, Larry. And Malvise Equipment repair to the DPW vac truck from the general fund. That was $26,180.54. That's all I have for announcements. I don't know if anybody else had anything. All right, so I will move on to correspondence. We had two pieces of correspondence. The first was from Alice and Dominique Bacone. I'm actually going to read the first paragraph anyway. We listened with dismay to the June 15th work session during which the construction of a dog park in the middle section of Memorial Park was once again being considered. While Station Road residents may sound like something in the general vicinity of the middle park, in fact, that part of Memorial Park lies directly adjacent to 130 Station Road. It is literally in our backyard. Furthermore, as the attached map makes clear, the south side of our house is situated about 35 feet from the park and the east side just 7 feet. Given the terrain, this most likely result in dog park lying less than 50 feet from the home's south-facing bedroom window, about 25 feet from the east-facing window, and 10 feet from actively used part of our yard. Is it something that should be considered allowable in Irvington? Is there precedent for such a thing? Could Marianne Glazer, who's the consultant on the dog park, provide you an example of dog parks located that close to a dwelling and downhill to boot? Think runoff. Have you walked 25 feet from your own house and imagined a dog park there? Hope you give serious thought to the situation before further exploring the feasibility of a dog park in Memorial Park, and then you consequently drop this unreasonable idea once and for all. They go on to talk about other potential uses for that area and things like that, but I think that's the general gist of it, and they have a picture as well. I think that we definitely are aware of the concerns. It was dropped last time, but we just unfortunately don't have a lot of land. So we have to consider it. And I think that this was the biggest concern that we had, and we try to minimize any impact on the, directly adjacent neighbor with the Bacones.
So we're hoping that we can work with them on this to come up with a feasible solution to their concerns, as well as being able to potentially add a dog park. So we hope to get some preliminary plans, which we'd be able to see how close things would be and what kind of creative solutions they have for buffering and things like that. But definitely noted, definitely a concern that we were aware of, and want to actively work towards, minimizing if we can, if it's possible. So the other letter is actually related to number 7, which is approval of a sewer line and conservation buffer easement from Marvera. So I won't read that. It is from Chet Kerr on behalf of the Greater Irvington Land Trust. So that's it for correspondence. So we will open it up to public comment if there's any there. I don't see any. There's another chance at the end, so I'll move on to the consent agenda. Any questions or comments with the consent agenda? If not, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda if I can have a second. All in
Second.
favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Next up, approval of the 2022 capital budget. Obviously, we've had several meetings on the capital budget, several discussions, both the short-term, long-term impacts, short-term, long-term projects, some of the larger projects that have been pushed off that were now in the planning stage. I think are some of the highlights, especially the fire department project, which is really more than just a fire department project at this point. But, I think that, we've discussed this quite a bit. Larry, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to, obviously our discussion. We think we had 2 work sessions and maybe a regular meeting. We talked about it, but this is definitely obviously the first time we're bringing it up for a vote. But I think also the biggest chunk, which would be the fire department funding for the architectural work, is actually, that's not in this piece of the capital budget.
Right.
So
Right. So, yeah. So as you said, we did talk about it at 2 work sessions. I think I hinted at it at a few other meetings because we knew that it was going to be a bit of a discussion. So, the capital budget, it was, if you take out one item, which is obviously the firehouse expansion, that project dominates all of the others in our discussions. But the rest of the capital budget is fairly routine. There's some money set aside for some engineering and design work, and for projects like the dog park, like we talked about, or the stage in Matheson Park. Those projects are we're trying to move those forward, but we're doing them in stages. So that you've expressed your support for doing the design work on projects like that, and we'll try to allocate money for that in this year's capital budget. But then next year you have a chance to see where we're at and reevaluate and make a decision on whether you're going forward on either or any of those projects. Those 2 are just examples. There's other equipment purchases in here, but there's also the larger nut that's in here is about $1 million. Is $1 million set aside for architectural engineering and design for the firehouse. So the way this has been presented to you, we've taken that project into account in our future projections. You saw those graphs of debt service going forward, and we talked about what that would mean going forward, the impact, and where it would leave us as a community in comparison to some of our similar neighbors. But that doesn't mean that money is committed and will be borrowed. You still need to have a discussion about the project in total. It's a big project. You need to talk about it and have a presentation from a design professional, which we have engaged already to do the schematic design, Sullivan Architecture. And we'll be doing that in September, at least getting started in September, so you can start getting familiar with the project and the community can start getting familiar with it as well. So all of our projections and I'll give you a quick for example. Won't go through it in detail since we did it on Wednesday last week. But a quick for example, this is a calculation of future debt service for the village. And that assumes that the firehouse project goes forward. Obviously, this looks different if that doesn't ultimately go forward. As far as projects for the upcoming year, just a very quick flavor of the first year of this capital budget is fairly routine, some pretty large equipment purchases. And we also have some flood control work, which I guess is a timely discussion today. But some culvert work and sidewalk work on South Broadway as well. Again, fairly routine type projects, other than some of the ones I mentioned earlier. So that's the capital budget in the first year. It's again, $3.5 million in projects, which would be funded by just short of $2.5 million in debt, again, provided the firehouse is approved going forward. And that's the overview. Any questions about that? I mean, I know we talked about it a lot, obviously, on Wednesday, so.
I just wanted to add that I was lucky enough to sit in on the department heads meeting last week. We all can't go at once, so we have to take turns. And that talked about this, and I was lucky enough to be up last week, and it was really interesting to see as Larry went through with the department heads the projects that are that are ongoing in the village, that how often it came up that's like, well, if the board provides the funding for this in the capital budget for next year, and you really saw two things. One is how vital most of these things were to just upkeeping the infrastructure of the village and keeping us in a place where we can provide basic services. And we're seeing how our staff is so skilled, and we're looking for ways to minimize the financial hits on things and stuff. It was really impressive to see, and I was already obviously supporting this before, but I left that meeting feeling really strongly that the money that's being allocated is going into the hands of people who know what we need and are making sure that we're set up in a good way. It was a very positive meeting, and I was really happy to be there. And I just wanted to share that with the rest of the board.
Good. Well, we're happy you attended, and obviously we encourage up to two of you to attend. We go every other week. I think our next one would be July 24th. Or 8th, July 28th, I think. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff going on, as you can see, and it takes a lot of coordination and staying on top of it all. And we have a good team together, and we work on it together. So thanks for attending, but feel free, anytime. Any other questions about this?
No, again, I think the bottom line is that what we're approving tonight is kind of, it's not outside the usual kind of size of a capital budget, especially excluding the $1 million for the architectural plan. So it's a little bit of a, maybe it's not quite as exciting as it would have been otherwise, but it's, I think what's coming is exciting.
Well, I wanted to thank you, all of you, publicly for kind of hanging in there, so to speak, with going through that budget. Last Wednesday's meeting wasn't easy, but I think by the end of it, I think you got your questions answered. I think you got what we're trying to do as a staff, and we understand what you're concerned about as far as the future economy, and so I think there's enough safeguards built into this that you can change directions if you need to, kind of midstream, should conditions change. I think you can react. And we all got that from the conversation on Wednesday. So it was very helpful and a very healthy conversation. Thank you.
And also thanks to all the department heads and to Brenda and Larry, obviously, for putting this all together and being so thoughtful about it all. Otherwise, I will make a motion, resolve that the 2022 capital budget dated July 18, 2022 is hereby adopted. If I can have a second. All in favor? Aye. All right, next is approval of a sewer line and conservation buffer easements for Marvera subdivision. As I mentioned earlier on the correspondence, Chet Kerr, on behalf of the Greater Irvington Land Trust, is in support of us approving this tonight.
So Mary Ann can go over that. Yeah.
Yeah, there are two separate agreements. I'm going to discuss them separately. The first is the conservation buffer easement agreement. Now, and this relates to the Marvera property on Castle Road that was recently subdivided. And a condition of the subdivision approval and the limited site development plan approval was that a conservation buffer had to be created. Larry, could you put the picture up? I'll show you where it is.
All right.
Okay,
So-
so if you can see the dotted line. Yeah, Larry, yeah, the dotted line. Now that is the and then it goes up to what it does is it runs along the southern portions of the lots, which it run and backs up to the Halsey Pond, to the path around Halsey Pond. And at that point, it's all 40 feet deep. The conservation buffer is 40 feet deep. Then it runs up from along the access way from Palliser Park to Halsey Pond. And at that point, it's 25 feet deep. Now, the conservation buffer remains the property of the individual lot owners. So there's 3 lot owners, 1, 2, 3 there. They still own it. I'll get back to that in a minute. Now, the purpose of this buffer, it's a vegetative buffer, and it's to protect 2 things: protect the water quality of Halsey Pond, and to mitigate any visual impacts on Halsey Pond. The planning board and its consultants and Marvera spent a lot of time. This was one of the most important elements of the subdivision approval on this. Now, their landscape architect worked with the village's landscape consultant to develop a conceptual landscape plan. It's not on here. There's a separate thing. There's a conceptual landscape plan, how the kind of plants that have to be in there and how many. And one of the conditions of the limited site development plan approval, and it will be a condition of each individual site development plan approval, is that before they can get a building permit for any work on the lot, they have to install the plants in the buffer. So the buffer has to be created before they start building. And each individual lot owner. So if only the lot owner on the west is ready to go, he or she has to improve that a buffer according to the landscape plan before they can do anything else on the property. Now the lot owners will still own the buffer, and it's their responsibility to maintain it. And then let me just tell you what some of the limitations on that buffer are. First of all, you can't have there can't be any construction or development within the conservation buffer except what's already in the conceptual landscape plan. There are a few remnants of structures in there, and some of them are coming out, some can remain, but the construction of any other structures is prohibited, except to the extent allowed by the conservation buffer agreement, and has to be approved by the village planning board. There are some existing stone walls in the conservation buffer. This provides that they can be repaired. In addition, if stone walls can be erected in there from stones that might be picked up on the site. Fences, the requirement on fences is that they have to visually recede and be made of dark and or natural materials, and they can't detract from the woodland nature of the conservation buffer. They can be built but they've got to be approved by both the planning board and the ARB. Ordinarily, fences aren't approved by the planning board, but it has to be approved by both. There can't be any dumping or storage of anything, ashes, leaves, garbage, sewage, anything in the conservation buffer area. Now, the maintenance responsibility is on the property owner. There's going to be there should not be a lot of maintenance, hopefully, but the responsibility is on the homeowner. It has to be maintained as a natural woodland. You can control noxious weeds and invasive species using best management practices. And then leaf blowing and mowing to under 6 inches isn't permitted, except maybe to establish the grasses in the beginning. And fertilizer, organic or inorganic fertilizer, is not allowed. Herbicides and pesticides are allowed only if applied by a New York State, a licensed New York State Department of Environmental Conservation applicator, and the village's landscape consultant has to approve it. Tree removals have to be approved by the planning board unless they're already on the plan. So as I said, the responsibility of maintaining it, because you got to remember, this is, the reason there's all these very strict limitations is, for all intents and purposes, it's going to look like the homeowner's backyard, so it just has to be treated differently than the rest of the backyard. Now, the people who own the lots have the responsibility, but if they're not observing the terms of the conservation easement, the village can come in and do whatever it thinks is necessary. It's not obligated, but it can, and those costs would have to be borne by the property owner. So, and the easement agreement is pretty long, but those are the most important elements. Certainly the ones I think you'd be interested in. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Otherwise, what you would be doing tonight is authorizing the mayor to sign the agreement, and then also sign whatever other documents have to be signed. Oh, I know one other thing I should say is this easement agreement is going to run with the land. It's got to be referred to in the deed. It's going to be filed at land records. So that's why we're formalizing it into this document. The mayor will sign, and then it'll be filed in land records at the county.
Marion, I had 2 questions actually. One is, I'm not sure if you remember, but I recall that there's a similar easement on the other side of the pathway from Palliser for the construction project that's going on the other side of the pathway. Do you remember if that's the same 25-foot?
I think they have 25 feet, but it's a little bit different. This one is more restrictive.
Right, I know. Obviously, they're not going to fill it in before they do the construction, because the construction's.
Yeah, I know. This one was. I mean, that was something that we were. The attorney for Marvera kept saying, yeah, but they didn't have to. Well, this is this property, far more than the one next to it, is really affects Halsey Pond. I mean, it's right there. It's right in its face. Not that the other one's not, but so right, this is
other question,
a little bit more restrictive. Just that I'm just saying that in short, this is a little more restrictive. But
my other question was, were there any other restrictions in terms of the yard leading up to the buffer zone, in terms of what can or can't be done in the actual yard area?
Well, certainly not as part of this conservation buffer easement. I guess the thinking being, and we talked about this a lot, but people believed that having a 40-foot deep vegetated buffer is going to adequately, protect the pond.
Thank you.
No, but Larry, there could be, I tell you, it's funny, you work on this so long, and you know it by heart, and then you put it aside for 6 months, and I'm not sure. I know we had talked about things like no fertilizer, whatever, but I think they decided not to go with it because of the buffer.
Okay.
So was there anything else on on this conservation buffer? Okay, so leave the picture up. Larry,
I'm
'cause I'm
sorry.
gonna- Yeah, that's okay. I'm gonna show just what the sewer easement's about. Okay, you see that sort of, the dotted line, yeah, Larry's running the little mitt around it. That's the area of the sanitary sewer easement. That's there now. It's the village maintains it now. But it was never formalized into an easement. It should have been, but it never was. A little bit of it on the upper left, I guess the upper left-hand corner is on the property next door to Marvera's. That's Litkovsky property. You see a little bit of it there. The rest of it runs through what will be the 3 Marvera lots. Like I said, the village has owned it and operated it, but there's never been a written easement agreement. So what this sewer line easement does, it formalizes it. It's got 3 parties: the village, the Litkovskys, and Marvera, because right now Marvera owns all of it. It's a 20-foot utility easement. What the agreement does is it gives the village the right to enter onto the property to install, operate, maintain, inspect, repair the sewer main there. The village has to give 72 hours notice, written notice, except in an emergency. The village, if it's doing any work on the utility easement, has to agree not to interfere with the access to the properties, and has to agree to restore the property to the same or reasonably similar condition. Unless, okay, I'll go back to that. Now, because of that, the property owners can install or build any structures or substantial structures over the thing, any trees, any substantial bushes, because otherwise the village wouldn't be able to get to it. They can't do it over the easement area, the 20 feet. The manholes have to remain accessible to the village and can't be covered by anything permanent. If some of the work could be in a parking area, if the village has work to do, the village gives the property owner notice, and they have to keep the cars off of it. And yeah, and then there's also a provision that if an irrigation system is installed over, in the utility easement area, the village, even though it's got generally the responsibility to restore the property the condition it was before, it doesn't have to do that with respect to irrigation systems. At the end, there was a change to the agreement that said that the Litkovskys wanted that if their irrigation system is interfered with, then Marvera has to repair it, but that does not affect, it doesn't affect the village at all. So that's pretty much it. And again, what you would do is authorize the mayor to sign this and any related documents. Does anybody have any questions about this one? Okay, so it's not, the area isn't anything new. It's already there. It's just, we've got a formal agreement now.
Well, I think, I was just going to say, to me, the conservation easement was obviously something a lot of people were concerned about, so I'm glad that was done. And obviously it's great to get the sewer easement cleared up and, in paper and clarified once and for all. Thank you to the planning board, Mary Ann, Ed, the whole building department for working on this, as well as the applicants and getting this all done. But I don't have any other questions.
If nobody else has any questions, I'll start reading. Whereas the Lakowskis, the neighbors at Forecastle Road, have executed the required driveway easement agreement, temporary access agreement, and sewer line easement agreement with Marvera. And whereas acceptance of this conservation easement is a type 2 action under the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and therefore requires no environmental review. Now therefore be it resolved to approve a sewer line and conservation buffer easement agreement between Marvera and the Village of Irvington, and further resolved to authorize the mayor and village administrator to execute said agreement and any other documents necessary to effectuate the transaction, all subject to the final approval of the village attorney. I'll make the motion if I could have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So I guess, Mary Ann, you'll obviously be in touch with whatever we need to do.
Yeah, you know what, let me just say, to respond to Larry Lonke's question before about whether there's any limitations. One thing just to come, there is a limit, and that didn't show up on the subdivision plat, but there's a different plat that shows the houses can only be in the buildings can only be in a certain part of the property. That's really been carefully delineated. In addition to which, it's not final site plan approval, so it's conceivable that during final site plan approval, there could be additional restrictions, but everything was conceptual because there's no houses proposed yet. Okay, I'm done, Brian.
Sure. Is there an original that you need me to sign, or someone will have to drop that off at Village Hall, or?
Yeah, we'll figure that out tomorrow. I'll give Zena and Steinmetz a call and figure out how to get the signatures, because there's also the TP 584s, which you need to sign in order for it to be filed at the county.
Okay. Next is approval of stormwater control facility easement and maintenance agreement with Mercy College. Is this you again, Mary Ann?
Yeah. Now Mercy, just this, the Marvera project was approved actually several months ago. That's why my memory isn't as clear on this. This was just approved last week, so I remember a little bit the details. But the Mercy project was approved at the last planning board meeting, and what it involves, it's kind of, if it's in connection with the right turn lane, there's going to be a second lane coming out of Mercy for right turns onto Broadway. You may remember that was a condition of the village's approval of the special permit about 7 years ago. It took a long time. It was a long time in coming, largely because of working things out with DOT, but they got their approval. So so they're going to be widening the street a little. They're changing the signs at the entrance and landscaping. They're upgrading the landscaping at the entrance. They're installing a pedestrian table where the entrance driveway crosses the aqueduct. They're creating a second lane in the entrance driveway as it heads to that little guard booth. And then they're also putting a new sign out on the path from the entry from the train station and in the rear of the property. Now it's because the work is going to disturb more than an acre of land, all the improvements they're doing, they had to prepare a stormwater pollution prevention plan, had to be submitted, reviewed by Han, approved by the planning board, which it was. And one of the requirements is that the village has to approve a formal maintenance agreement for the stormwater management facilities. The templates in the village code, this one pretty much follows the template. And in it, the Mercy agrees to, maintain, clean, and repair the stormwater control measurements as necessary to ensure that they remain in good working order. They're responsible for all the expenses of it. About a year after the project is completed, and then every year after, they have to bring in a consultant to inspect it and make sure that all the stormwater facilities are working correctly, and have to report that to the village. And they have to make any repairs that are necessary, or any repairs that the village believes are necessary. And then the village, the agreement also gives the village the right to enter onto the property to inspect the stormwater management facilities. And also if it believes that there's a real issue, an emergency issue, and the Mercy isn't dealing with it, which is very unlikely, then the village can do it and charge them back. And that's pretty much what this is about.
Anyone have any questions on this one? Resolved to approve a stormwater control facility easement and maintenance agreement between Mercy College and the Village of Irvington, and to further resolve to authorize the mayor to execute said agreement and all other documents necessary to effectuate the transaction, all subject to the final approval of the village attorney. I'll make a motion if I can have a second. All in favor? Aye. Next up is approval of a grant agreement with NYSERDA for energy code enforcement. Do you want to handle this one, Larry?
Yeah, so there was, this involves two separate solicitations that were made by NYSERDA. The first, it's focused on energy code, but the first is a grant basically to improve from a technology standpoint, the application and enforcement of the energy code. So what that translates into is essentially upgrading the building department software and doing it with a $50,000 grant, which came out of nowhere, frankly. So the mayor in Hastings actually alerted us to it. The two mayors got together and alerted us to this idea. So we applied for it and received it. So that's 50,000 of the 125,000. The remaining 75,000 is relates also to energy code compliance, but it's a pilot program that NYSERDA is doing where we essentially keep a short list of consultants that have been pre-approved or vetted by NYSERDA and provide that information to potential applicants for permits, whoever may be applying for work here in Irvington. The consultants are supposed to be specialists in energy code and efficiency and energy code compliance. And although we don't usually make recommendations, to applicants to our building department, in this instance, we will be as it relates to energy code compliance. So it's a pilot project that NYSERDA wants to push forward. They want to see how it works, if there's better compliance, if there's better efficiency in the plans that are being presented. So it's an interesting program, not a lot of overhead for us, and it's a $75,000 grant to be rewarded for pushing this pilot program. So we'll see how it goes.
So Larry, people aren't required to use these people, but they're given names as resources.
Correct. And we don't pick out the names. It's a NYSERDA driven thing from what I understand. So yeah, we just have to essentially provide them with feedback on how well it works or how well it doesn't work. So pretty simple.
And thank you, Nikki Armacost, for pointing it out.
Yeah. Yeah, she was all over this one.
Resolved to authorize the village administrator to execute grant agreement number 188963 PON 4600 with NYSERDA for third-party support and advancing code compliance technology, or to provide for future technology-driven energy code compliance processes in the village of Irvington in the amount of $125,000. I'll make the motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Authorizing submission of a grant application for the Route 9 flood mitigation project.
Yep. So we have been diligently working on a grant application to New York State under the Consolidated Funding Application, the CFA process. All of those applications are due at the end of this month. This particular project is we're trying to take advantage of the Climate Smart Communities Grant Program. We most recently did this in 2017 for the Hudson View Park Culvert Project, which for those of you that were on the board at the time, remember that, and it was a pretty complicated project, ended up being an important project, but nonetheless, we did receive a significant amount of money on that grant application of about $300,000. This particular one is a culvert. We're calling it a flood mitigation project, but it's essentially the widening of a culvert that carries Barney Brook underneath Broadway and a portion of Harriman Road. So that this culvert is significantly undersized. It's one of several big projects along Barney Brook that need to be completed, especially the ones that are downstream like this one, before we can even get up to Meadow Way and Dunham Place and those areas that have significant flooding. We need to fix our downstream problems first. So we did the Station Road Culvert project a few years back. This project is on the list, and there's still a couple of others, but this one was about the right size. Maybe it's a little bit big for this grant program, but we're pushing the envelope a bit and trying to apply for a good sized grant to offset this project. The resolution has all the details in it when Brian gets to it, but it's a $2 million project, and we're looking for a 50% grant on it, and that would be a huge win if we are able to get there. Any questions? Okay. Brian, you have the revised couple extra words that we inserted in here.
I do, yep.
Yeah, nothing.
Whereas the Village of Irvington is applying to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation for a grant under the 2022 Climate Smart Communities Grant Program for a project entitled Route 9 Flood Mitigation Project in the Village of Irvington. And whereas the grant application requires the applicant municipality to obtain the approval and endorsement of the governing body of the municipality in which the project will be located. And whereas cost estimates totaling $2,273,141 have been prepared for the project, whereas the village will provide a cash match from the capital fund equal to 50% of the total project cost. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby does authorize submission of the application for $1,136,000 grant under the 2022 Climate Smart Communities Grant Program for the Route 9 Flood Mitigation Project. And upon award of such request, commits to match the grant with $1,137,141 in order to implement the project, and further resolve that the village administrator is herein authorized to take any and all such steps as necessary to effectuate the intent of the resolution. I'll make a motion if I can have a second. All in favor? Aye. Next is a approval of a lease with Consolidated Hudson Electric for a garage on North Ferris Street. This is a straightforward one.
Yeah. This is we rent a small garage on North Ferris Street. It's actually the police department has some of their equipment, like the e-bikes that they have, and some other equipment that we just don't have room for in Village Hall. So very small, $175 per month rent, but can't sign it unless you approve it.
I will assume that there's no questions on this one. Resolved to authorize the village administrator to sign an agreement with Consolidated Hudson Electric for the rental of a garage number 3 at 11 North Ferris Street from July 1st, 2022 to June 30, 2023 at a rent of $175 per month. I'll make the motion if I can have a second. All in favor? Aye. Next is approval of an employment contract with the police chief. Want to give us the background here, Larry?
Not too much background other than the chief was appointed back in February. We've been February of 21, excuse me. We've been working on some terms of an agreement for him, and it's scheduled here to start June 1st of 2022, so a little bit retroactive, and run for 3 years.
I think the only thing I'll say here is I was glad that we were able to come to an agreement with the chief. I think we've all been very impressed with his work, and want him to be a happy employee. So hopefully this gets him there, and happy to sign, or happy to have it signed. So we're happy to sign it, I guess, and signing it. But resolved to authorize the mayor to sign an employment agreement with Francis Pignatelli for the position of police chief for the term of June 1, 2022 through May 31st, 2025. I'll make the motion if I can have a second. All in favor? Aye. Approval of a filming permit for 2D Creative Productions. This one's also pretty straightforward because it's actually photos, correct?
Yeah, it actually is a still photo shoot over 2 days. They do have a fair number of people that'll be on site, but the chief has worked out all of the details. He'll have an officer assigned just to make sure about parking and, you know, traffic flow. I'm not sure there's that much traffic there, but, you know, to make sure that things flow smoothly. So that's it.
So just a quick question. I was curious. I noticed that there were 2 separate permits in the agenda. There was one for this one, and there was a second one for, I guess, Villa Lawaro. And I was just curious why the 2 permits looked so different. There were different forms and different amounts of information given on each permit. And I was just curious as to why that was.
You've been doing your homework. So no, we literally.
That's how I spend my Sunday. I read 150 pages of agenda.
Yeah,
It's only 115 this week,
my
Larry.
assistant. Good for you. It was my assistant Karen's idea, actually, we revised the form, and we have to take the old one out of service. I think the old one might have been downloaded. And so this one here, I think, had less detail than the next one, but
Right.
the new form, we're gonna make sure that's rolled out and everyone uses it. But basically, we found ourselves with the old form, we found ourselves constantly asking the same questions over and over. So we decided to make sure we update the form and just get the information right on intake. It reduces the number of questions going forward. It's just a practical thing, that's all. But we just did the changeover like literally in the last couple of months, and so it's something must have been out there. It was used, it was old.
Thanks.
Resolved to approve a filming permit for 2D Creative Productions to film at 296 Riverview Road in Irvington, New York on July 27th and 28th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. with a fee of $1,000 per day. I'll make a motion if I can have a second. All in favor? Aye. Next is approval of a filming permit for One Story Up LLC.
Again, pretty straightforward on this 1-day film shoot. Hours are 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. You know, hopefully they don't go long, but I think, you know, we will have an officer there to make sure things are monitored. The chief worked out the details on this one as well. In this case, there's the vehicles that they have, that they indicated they would have on site. It looks like their property can, you know, easily accommodate the vehicles that they have.
Okay, any questions on this one? Obviously, I know it's a site that's come up before, but it seems this is very straightforward. It's going to be all indoors other than filming the arrivals. It looks like so.
Yep.
Resolved to approve a filming permit for One Story Up LLC to film at Villa Lawaro in Irvington, New York on July 24th, 2022 from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. with a fee of $1,000. I'll make the motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And next is the bonus content for tonight, which is 14A, which is a resignation from an appointment to the Architectural Review Board. Deborah Hargraves, after serving for many years on the ARB, I believe she's moving, so she's no longer going to be able to serve. And Mark and I were able to meet with Libby Lando on Friday and interview her and find out a little bit about her and why she wants to be on the ARB, and everything seemed great. And I guess we'll go from there. But resolved to accept with regret the resignation of Deborah Hargraves from the Architectural Review Board effective July 18, 2022. Further resolved to appoint Libby Lando as the second alternate of the Architectural Review Board with the term to expire December 2022. I'll make the motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. So now we'll go to reports of boards, standing committees and officers, trustee liaison reports. Let's see, Arlene, you're actually the top of my screen tonight, so we'll let you go first.
And I don't have anything really to report.
Perfect.
Other than to say that I'm sure the DPW is going to be very busy after these terrible storms today.
Yeah, I saw lots of trees down. Mr. Lonke.
Again, nothing official. I just mentioned, summer programming goes on in the rec department. Teamscape finished their first trip and they're starting their second. Day camp continues. The O'Hara basketball tournament continues. And there's always something going on at the O'Hara Nation Center.
Mark
Nothing at the moment, thank you.
and Mitch.
Nothing.
So we'll go immediately to the village administrator's report.
I actually don't have a report. My report was on your agenda this time. Everything that was there. So we're good.
I assume there's no village clerk treasurer's report for you to relay?
No, other than
audit's
she's been,
ongoing.
yeah, other than the audit finished up successfully last week. I know there was a few questions that were outstanding at the end of the week, and I know Brenda was working on them diligently. So it's a good job on her part. She had 5 people in from the auditing firm, which having been someone who was a treasurer at one point, keeping 5 people busy for an entire week is a lot of work. So, and she did.
Yeah, I was a little embarrassed. It was a week ago, 2 weeks ago today, I went in to drop off the weekly invoice packet and I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt and at least I had shoes on. I didn't have flip-flops, but I met the entire audit staff who were the only ones there. So it was very unimpressive meeting the mayor, I think.
Good.
But we'll move right on to the village attorney's report.
I don't have one.
Public comments. I don't know if there's no attendees, so I'm going to say no.
Yeah,
Any action items? I didn't get anything.
I didn't have anything.
So then I will make a motion to adjourn to
Adjourn,
to a session with council. If I could have a second. Arlene gave me a second, I believe.
Arlene gave you the second, yeah.
All in
Aye.
favor? All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thanks,
week.
everyone. Good night. And you have the link to the